Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. And today I just wanted to talk a bit about the books that I've been reading this week. I hope you're having a really lovely week. Where we are in the UK is wonderfully grey and slightly miserable, but all otherwise good. I'm also, by delightful delightful set of events, when this goes live, I will be at the Cheltenham Literary Festival. So I'm very, very excited to be walking around and seeing that and watching some of the talks, hopefully meeting some of the authors and things as well. But yes, with all of that in mind, let's get talking a little bit about what I've been reading this week, and I hope you're having a great week. First up, as I sort of mentioned, I've been keeping up with trying to finish reading the rest of the books from the Polari long lists from this year. I just have, I think, one left, but I came across this lovely one and I was very, very excited to read it, which was The Last Doorbell by William Parker. And this I thought was just a really beautiful piece of writing. The core idea of the story here is that there is a man who's looking back over his history, and particularly various sort of people he's known, and at one point he is working as a sort of rent boy, or kind of there are some things that start as more companionship and then become slightly more sexual or what have you, but he is working doing that and is basically ready to give that up, but he is told about one last client to essentially meet, and that is the last doorbell. The book sort of begins with this idea of him going to do this one final meet, and him going and sort of getting ready to press the last doorbell and kind of start the next phase of things off. But what I thought was really just beautiful about this is there's so much tenderness here about the ways that he interacts with the men who he meets, these clients, and how often there are some elements that are strictly transactional, that are just him meeting these men. But there are other more tender moments that come through of him realizing perhaps how they might be lonely or might be needing some intimacy and some touch. And sometimes for him that he feels like he needs that intimacy. And we see this sort of this history going over sort of tens of years. And it's just really beautifully done, I think, where you get these little moments of tenderness, these little moments of sexiness, and then the story just overall is this way of looking for something else. And I think there's something really quite specific about this here, of the ways that often, particularly for this book, gay men, or I suppose men who have sex with men, form community in ways that might not appear, it might sort of go against the grain of what is maybe seen as typical. So the idea that you could have somebody who you meet regularly, and it's mostly to do with sex or intimacy, and there's no other relationship or whatever outside of that, but there's still something so tender and affirming about that. And so I think this book really captures that beautifully, and I absolutely see why it was longlisted. I think this is a beautiful piece of writing. It was just a nice, I took this on holiday with me, and this was just a really, and sort of finished it off sort of recently, but this was a book that I found really beautiful for that. It worked really well when I was on holiday to have something a little bit more escapist and a little bit more just sort of tender, and just a really good story. Next up, I read a very different book, the Möbius, I guess, book by Lacey. And this is a really genre blending type of book. It in many ways is both fiction and non-fiction, which also fits very well with what I've read of hers before, because the biography of X does some really interesting things about that being a novel that is told about a biography and about a non-fiction story with other elements thrown in. And so the Möbius book, I think, is just really fun in a lot of ways, as well as being quite a sad and intense book. So this book is in two parts, sort of, and they bleed really into each other. But part of this book is Lacey herself writing about her life, her friendships, relationships, and those sorts of things. And there's a lot that comes into this, particularly around faith, and particularly around sort of her sense of identity when things are changing in her life. But then we also have something that's a bit more of a novel, or feels a little bit more fictional. And the way this book is done means that, and I was reading this on a sort of an e-reader, and I didn't have the thing turned on where you knew how many pages were coming. And what then really threw me was quite early into this book, it seemed to be ending. There was an author's note, there were acknowledgements, there were all the thank yous and all that kind of thing. And I thought, well, this is very early for this book. I thought this book was sort of 200 pages odd. And then you go a couple more pages and the next part of this book starts. And the book is framed with this really exciting, interesting thing going on, of these two different things going side by side, that I just found utterly fascinating. It kind of bleeds into each other, and it doesn't immediately become clear in some ways where that border is, because although there's an end to one part and then a beginning to the second part, it doesn't feel quite as clean cut as that at times. And the two books feel like they very much, she needed to write both of them and they can't really live without each other. And I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, quite a good kind of head scratcher. And I really enjoyed how she delves into a lot of her personal life, but also brings up this really beautiful novel like structure for some things as well. Really, really interesting. And last but definitely not least, Ian McEwan with What We Can Know. And I'm always a little nervous with new Ian McEwan books, because for me, he's one of those authors who I will pick up pretty much anything they write. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think I've read all of his novels and short story collections. And I think there's one screenplay and libretto that I haven't read. I love him. I think he's a fantastic author. And I was slightly, the previous couple of novels or novellas of his, I'd been a little bit more lukewarm on. And, you know, still they were good in other elements, but I didn't love them as much as I had some of his other work. And What We Can Know, for me, felt like a real return to the kind of book of his that I adore. So what I think Ian McEwan does very well, I might do a separate video just on this book because I have a lot I want to talk about, but when Ian McEwan is at his best, I think he is so good at essentially introducing, almost like when you watch an episode of The Simpsons and there are subplots and there are little themes that trickle through and then there's a payoff gag or payoff something later. Ian McEwan's books, when they're at their best, I think really do that well, where there is a key point that he is aiming at. There's a direction, and the book in a literary way services that idea and that discussion around the idea. And he's very, very good at this when he's really focused on this, I think. Or at least in some of the novels, I think he does this excellently. And in this book, there's a lot about the idea of things being fleeting. There's a sense that you can't keep something forever. This book details a lot about the idea of a changing world and the impossibility of holding on to something forever, of something is always in flux and it will always change, and something will be lost and something will be gained, and all that unintentionally rhymed. But there's lots of that kind of thing happening. I adored what this book does with this, because the core idea is we start the book in the future, looking back on very recent past for us. So the book is starts really in 2119, and we're told this is a time in the world where the environment has massively changed. Climate change has caused many things to happen. We are seeing the seas are rising. There's a lot of destruction. Global sort of loci of power have massively shifted. There's a city called New Lagos, which is the home of pretty much all of the data and sort of online activity that had been there. And this kind of impermanence comes through really strongly there, of this idea that data and the internet and so many other things are very fleeting, that we could, you can have music on your Spotify and then Spotify can delist those and you no longer have those. Or you can, there can be a blog post that you really like and actually at some point that is lost to the internet and you can only access it through other things. And in this new world, essentially New Lagos is a giant digital library. And in all of this, there is a discussion about a poem that has been written, performed once in 2014, and has then never been heard of again. And the only references to that poem are people talking about the poem and saying, this is a masterpiece of a poem, the likes of which we will never see again. It is a rare moment of human achievement that is so beyond anything else. But that in some ways adds to its intrigue, because it's this one-off thing and it is so impermanent. the whole world, well, not the whole world, but a sort of literary subsect of the world want to know about it and spend a lot of hours researching anything they can find about it. And then the novel shifts into 2014, where we see a little bit about what was actually happening around the poem. This was a poem that was written for a lover and performed as a birthday present. But we come to learn more and more in the novel what the poem represents in wider in wider ways as well, because there's a lot more that goes into it. And I just love the way this novel plays constantly with this idea of permanence and impermanence. Is the role of art to be something long lasting, that in 400 years somebody can see this thing and be touched by it? Or can art also be this fleeting thing that is appreciated in the moment, the act of creating it is the art as well, and then it is gone? And obviously that's a discussion around lots of artistic sort of ways of being as well, in terms of something like dance is much more in the moment than something perhaps like a painting. But there's something so interesting about the way this book then plays with this idea of art, impermanence and permanence, and things like the natural world, because this poem celebrates the natural world, but also, as we learn later in the book, there's some kind of fallacy to that. This is it a hollow statement to praise the world and then do nothing to protect it? And I just think there's so much going on in this book that my brain was very, very happy playing around with the ideas of this. And it's almost one of those books I really just want to write an essay about or something. I just think it's so interesting. I really loved this. I think this feels like a really good, solid McEwan novel. And it just reminds me just how good he can be. I loved this. I think this is excellent. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. I'd love to hear other people's perspectives on it, because I think it just kind of clicked, you know, when a book kind of connects at the right time, the right moment, and it's the right kind of book for your brain. This is one of those, I think, and I just really, really loved it. So those are the books I've been reading this week. Thank you for joining me as I ramble about them. But I hope you're having a really great week. Take care, and speak to you all very soon. And I shall hopefully report back from Cheltenham Literary Festival at some point soon, as well as other books that I've been reading. Take care, and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.